as we went through this conversation, at one point, my board member just kind of jokingly made a joke and said, Joni and Friends is the best kept secret in disability ministry. And before I could hold my tongue or stop myself, I said out loud, well, that's failure. In those situations, right, the room goes silent and you don't know, okay, I should have kept my mouth shut. But the board of director leaned in and he said, tell me more.
This is The Responsive Lab, a podcast that talks about fundraising, technology, and nonprofit leadership for modern nonprofits.
We have conversations with practitioners, teachers, and experts so you and your organization can leave behind outdated tactics and embrace responsive fundraising. Welcome to The Responsive Lab.
Donna, thank you for coming on the podcast today. We're really looking forward to chatting with you.
Absolutely. I'm excited about this.
Yes. Okay. Well, as we jump in, can you just give folks a little bit of your background, kind of catch them up, give them a brief overview of your journey, and then kind of land the plane at what you're doing currently?
Sure. Well, I spent probably the good majority of my career in a consumer products world, specifically the apparel and footwear consumer products world. And I actually started designing raincoats for London Fog right out of college. It's probably terrifying thinking that I'm in the nonprofit world now, but I moved from there, started designing sportswear at Adidas. And at that point, I quickly realized that I didn't like design as much as I liked branding and marketing. So I then spent a decade at Adidas in brand management and marketing. I was able to be on the forefront when we moved as an organization and did a major rebrand from the Trefoil logo to the Mountain logo. That was back in the 90s. So now you all know how old I am. But in that business, the apparel and footwear business, people move a lot. We move from competitor to competitor. So I also spent some long stretches with United Colors of Benetton, which is a major Italian worldwide apparel company. Ran marketing for their sports system brand, which was a collection of 7 large brands like Nordica, Rollerblade, surf brands. We had golf brands. We had 7 different brands. And then right before I came to the nonprofit world, I had the opportunity to be part of what I would call a total brand shift, or even maybe a total vision shift at the Dickies workwear brand, and got to be part of helping to shape what does that legacy look like moving forward, for maybe even for generations to come. So it was a really fun career. And now I have been at Joni and Friends for 8 years now. It's hard to believe it's been that long. I'm the Chief Marketing and Development Officer here.
Yeah. So we got to have a pre-conversation where we talked about this episode, and that's where I learned the pronunciation Adidas, because me and probably a lot of our listeners have probably said Adidas.
Yes.
And so I love that.
That's
that
the
little
American
education
way.
piece. So that actually, we love teaching. We love instructing. We love when people have takeaways. And so if nothing else, that is the proper way to say Adidas.
Unfortunately, that's usually, Scott, the only thing people remember about a conversation with me. So
well,
you got the main point.
I want to respectfully disagree and feel like there's plenty more because you do bring such an incredible background and experience in some really major brands. And you mentioned Rollerblade. I was a big rollerblader, so that one we can talk about another time. But
yes, absolutely.
But what I think is really interesting then is where you're at now and in the nonprofit sector. And so I'm curious, when you first started in the nonprofit sector, what were some of those big differences that you noticed from like a brand and marketing perspective compared to your previous experience?
Well, I think the first thing I noticed was budget, of course, right? Budgets are very different from that world to this world. That was a big adjustment for me. I think another big adjustment for me was kind of understanding the sales pull, like what are you selling? And so working in consumer products, a customer gives you cash and you give them a product, like it's a physical transaction, and really making that adjustment to you're allowing a donor to fulfill what their mission is and fulfill what their calling is. So that was a hard transition. But I think from maybe either a ministry or maybe a organizational perspective, I think it was structural was the first thing I noticed, structural and strategic. And I think the second thing was really a lack of value for the marketing function. And, what I observed first at Joni and Friends was there was a major difference. It was the lack of an overarching brand and structure, a brand strategy. And when I walked in, there was this long list of, I'll call them tasks, and they were all disconnected from each other. The individual channels, they were all operating outside of each other. They were doing their own thing. There was no integration. And on top of that, your development and fundraising professionals were essentially steering all external communication. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, what went out to the public was always donor focused. It was always transactional. It was an appeal. It was a thank you. It was a result of their giving, and it was another appeal. And for me, it meant I saw two things. We were talking primarily to ourselves. We were talking to our own existing donors, and we were communicating from the inside out, not inviting others to be part of a broader mission, not inviting other people in. We weren't expanding our borders. We were kind of protecting them. Instead of inviting others into our community. So I think that was the first thing, that structural difference. Because in my business world, marketing led everything, right? Marketing came before the sales pitch. Marketing came before, and it went out and it created the audience. It created the demand for the product. Then the second thing I really noticed, not only here at Joni and Friends, but with other nonprofits, was that marketing was not seen as a strategic driver because it was hard to tie immediate revenue to some of the brand building things that a traditional brand would do. And because of that, they couldn't justify their investment. But I also found, and this might be because it was a Christian world, but I found a lot of people that viewed marketing as manipulation, not as an engine to drive growth. And I think those were some of the biggest things that I noticed as a difference.
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, you're talking to two marketers. So like in the inside, Scott and I are just cheering on everything you're saying, that marketing should drive everything. But I think most people would agree with what you're saying. But then when it comes to pitching brand awareness internally at a nonprofit is where a lot of people like face the biggest issue. Is they're like, yeah, that sounds great. So like post on social media a few times, like that's great. So like what did it take to make that case to leadership that like investing in brand would be really important for the longevity of the organization?
Well, I had probably an unusual journey to do this, and it kind of was unexpected and almost came out of an accident. When I first joined Joni and Friends, I wasn't in marketing. We didn't have a marketing role here. We didn't have marketing in our leadership team at all. I was a senior manager. I was overseeing publishing rights. And honestly, I was just coasting. I was frankly bored. And I got pulled into a meeting, and I have no idea why or what happened, but I got pulled into a meeting about major donor fundraising. And in that meeting were several executives and one of our international board members. And as we went through this conversation, at one point, my board member just kind of jokingly made a joke and said, Joni and Friends is the best kept secret in disability ministry. And before I could hold my tongue or stop myself, I said out loud, well, that's failure. And, the room in those situations, right, the room goes silent and you don't know, okay, I should have kept my mouth shut. But the board of director leaned in and he said, tell me more. So he wanted to know more. And so it gave me an opportunity to really explain what I meant by that. And so after that conversation, our leadership team, they really came to me and they said, can you explain to us what you mean by that's failure? And so I kind of laid out for them that branding and creating a really unified strategy and a communication plan of the brand it has to go first, right? It has to come before everything else. And in order to do it, we needed a memorable, powerful, and a unified communication plan. And those were three things that we didn't have. We needed to be looking towards the future, not just what's going to happen this year, right? So fundraising communication is all about what are you going to do today? Where marketing has to look to the future. We have to go past where we are today and say what's coming at us in the next 5 years. We needed to harness every channel together. We needed to go with that omni-channel, multi-channel approach where one channel worked with another rather than having them stuck in these silos where they were. I explained to them that if we didn't expand our audience, we would go the way of every other nonprofit that doesn't expand their audience into extinction, and that we had to go beyond our existing donors and we had to create an audience, and that audience just doesn't automatically happen. You have to do the work to create it. And I also suggested that we needed to refresh our visual identity. So that meant a huge logo campaign. But I have to say that part was easy. The harder part was going to the CFO and saying, I'm going to take our budget and I'm going to spend 60% of our budget on brand awareness and 40% of our budget on fundraising. And then really kind of explaining to them why. Because every time I tell someone I did that, they say, oh my gosh, how did you manage to do that? But it was that exclamation that it's truly risky not to. And if you really are trying to build a long-term strategy, it's risky not to split your budget that way. It's risky not to go out ahead and spend that 60% or more on brand awareness. But I also know that that's not the normal way a CFO would respond. So I do identify that I'm very lucky that I happen to have a CFO who was willing to take the risk. I also framed it for them as, we're a Christian nonprofit. So I framed it in biblical references, but I framed the brand as planting, right? So in Galatians 6, and it talks about planting comes before the harvest, right? So you have to prepare the soil. You've got to sow good seeds. You've got to water it. And then you have to wait. And you have to let it grow and you have to let it build. And that out of that comes fundraising, which is the harvest. And that's the time when you see the results of everything that you've done leading up to that. But then there's also this different stage in the middle, right? You have planting and harvest, but in the middle you have to cultivate. And so I think that helped me in sharing that picture with people. It helped them kind of understand that we needed to take a longer term approach to what I was talking about. We weren't going to see results this year. We weren't going to see, results even in the next couple of years. And I would say it probably took us 4 or 5 years to really see results. But I also promised them I wasn't going to take all the money there. Right? We were still going to look at direct mail and email, which was funding the ministry now. That wasn't going to change, but I'm going to grab these couple of channels over here. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're going to experiment with. And that's where we're going to go and try and drive new audiences. So that's kind of how I explained it. And I got approval to do it. So I got lucky.
I'm curious about this because it's a conversation that takes definition and nuance, but as you talk to as you spoke to your CFO and as other people maybe think about this conversation and essentially being able to propose, here's what brand awareness and here's what marketing and here's what these things are and why they matter. How did you communicate that in a way that the people you were speaking to understood? Because they're not in that every day. They're not thinking about that, but they have to get on board and understand what it is in order to actually say yes.
Yeah. I think that, so traditionally people that I've come in contact in fundraising, there's a strategy. We need to find younger donors, right? And that was really a lot of this was multiple conversations, right? I'm explaining it to you in one setting, but obviously these were multiple meetings. This didn't happen in one setting and it was all like, go Donnie, you got it, right?
Yeah. That would
If you
be
remember,
amazing,
we didn't
right?
have a marketing team. There was no marketing team. So, but what I tried to do was explain the risk of not doing it and really kind of focus them on, I need you to look ahead and I need you to think through what is the risk if we don't do this? And so in that, typical conversation, right, where you have, every hearse that goes by, there's one of your donors, right? That funny analogy. But at the same time, if you're looking for a younger audience, they are not immediately going to be a donor. You need to cultivate them first as an onlooker, first as someone that's just dipping their toe in, getting to know who you are. We honestly, at Joni and Friends, because we're a founder-led organization, I needed to introduce Joni to a new demographic. I needed to introduce her a new generation of people that didn't know who she was. So I think that my approach was likely different than what every fundraiser would tell you. We have to find new donors. Yeah, we have to find new donors. And yes, we have to find younger donors, but, describe to me how they're going to come to us. And, how are we going to build first a relationship? Because that's the most important thing, to build that relationship first. How are we going to spark curiosity in people? And so for us, is how are we going to use Joni to do that? Because we are a founder-led organization. And then I really had to sell them on the long game, that they are not going to see results. Another thing that people probably need to know is we did this in 2018. So within 18 months of us walking down this path, we had a global pandemic. And while that was tough for everybody else, for us at Joni and Friends, it allowed the marketing team to do nothing but cultivate, right? We cultivated, we drove new audiences, we introduced who Joni was to other audiences because we had the bandwidth to do it, because we weren't trying to market programs, we weren't trying to market to volunteers, we weren't doing all the things that detract you from brand building. And we were able to really focus on that for 2020, and it definitely laid the groundwork for where we are today. Did I answer your question, Scott? I'm not sure if I answered it.
Yeah, you did. I think that's really helpful. And I think painting it in the picture of not like, well, here's what I want to do and here's why, is more like, here's what happens if we don't do this, is a really helpful framework.
I was looking at a report that came out recently. I think I saw it on LinkedIn, of most trusted nonprofits in the US, which I feel like you, Donna, probably have looked at when you were thinking about brand building. But the top three were St. Jude's, Make-A-Wish, and American Red Cross. And when I think about theirs, I imagine they for sure have a marketing department, and they are spending a high percentage on branding, because we all recognize those. And if I would name the rest of the 15, it's because of the branding, right? It's not because, and what you said is something I've heard many times. Let's go get more donors, not let's go get a bigger audience that we can then eventually turn into donors, but it's immediately more donors. So we go to our tiny little sphere of influence and we try to get new donors there instead of going externally to get a bigger audience. I'm curious, after you got that yes, like what were your immediate next steps?
So yeah, if we take that planting analogy, right? So first you have to plant the brand. Then we have to be diligent in cultivating that brand, creating a community, and then there's the harvest. So if I was giving someone kind of what we did first, I'm gonna actually give you suggestions based on where I think I'm gonna critique us on what we didn't do and maybe should have done better. I would encourage people, if you get that yes, now's your opportunity to slow down before you speed up. There's always an instinct that you jump like straight into tactics, right? Redesign a logo, create a video, launch a campaign, right? Those are things that we as marketers, that feels comfortable. And so we just go there. And I think if I were to flip it now and do it again, that would be my last step. The thing that we did not do well at Johnny and Friends, and all on me because we didn't do it well. Once we got a core brand narrative, we didn't give it time to sit with our internal staff. Mm. And I call it inside sales. Before spending $1, before spending anything, going out and doing anything, you need to have alignment inside. They need to be on board with where we're going. You need to sell this idea to your entire inside staff. And that way you're not fighting that battle on the inside at the same time you're trying to launch this on the outside. And so that'd be my first thing. Get your brand narrative together, understand that, but then communicate it internally. From a brand narrative, though, you really have to understand who you are, why you exist, what makes you distinct. Okay, this is just textbook MBA marketing stuff, right? There's nothing life-shattering there, but that has to be the foundation of every message and every campaign. And Carly, you mentioned the most trusted nonprofits. Those trusted nonprofits are trusted because they're consistent, because their message doesn't vary, because every time I see something about St. Jude, I feel the same thing. I hear the same words. I see, it might be a different story, but I see what they're doing and it's consistent. And that's why you trust them. It's when you go all over the place that people lose trust in who you are. And so really fine tune what your brand narrative is, who you are, why you exist, and what makes you distinct. Then share it with your staff. Make sure staff is in alignment. They are your brand. They're your brand ambassadors. They're the ones that are out there. They're the ones that are going to come in contact with the most people because you don't have the money to be St. Jude. So you have to get them in alignment. And the second step, I would then say the next thing to do is really audit your brand across every touch point that you have. Make sure that you're getting a big picture view of how your brand is communicated, whether it's through social, email, direct mail, phone calls. How are you communicating to people, and is it consistent? Because that, again, that's what people remember. One of the things we found at Johnny and Friends is we had a lot of crazy inconsistencies. When we did this brand audit, we had 19 local field offices. I had 19 rogue marketing agencies out there doing whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, in any color, no matter what the font was, didn't matter, right? And they did it under the guise that it was locally and culturally acceptable to their audience. And here I was going, nope, that is not true. Not true. So that audit for us revealed that we needed a stronger visual identity. That audit revealed that we had a fragmented message. It was not consistent, that we had siloed communication, and we had some channels that were working, and we had other channels that just drained resources. So that second thing, that audit of who you are, is critically important. And then the multi-year strategy comes out of that.
Yeah. That's like, I feel like that's a master class that you just gave for people. And so the encouragement would be to probably listen back, take some copious notes when you're off the treadmill or out of the car or wherever you're listening to this, because I think there's a lot of really specific things that people can actually use to create a system, a process, like a way to kind of walk through. But one of the things I'm really curious about, because in these conversations of saying, hey, I want to take 60% of our budget, or this is where we need to make our investment, I'm sure there's conversation around, okay, what is that investment going to look like? And how are we going to measure this? Like, how are we going to see if this is working? And so I'm curious, like, what was that part of the conversation? How do you think about measuring this impact of brand investment in a way that you could understand, okay, are we going in the right direction? Yeah. And that you could communicate to leadership, here's the results that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the reality is, Scott, that brand building it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Ministry still has to move forward. Every day you still have to turn on lights. You still have to pay your staff, even while you're laying this foundation. So practically everything kind of ran in parallel for us. We started really by looking honestly at our channels and looking at the ones that were driving revenue. And so from a measurement perspective, the ones that were driving revenue were obviously direct mail, email. They were still funding the organization. And we committed to not touch those right away because they still were funding the organization. So, and our audit is what helped us make that decision. Our audit is what helped us really understand, this is the channel that we're not going to touch right away. This is the channel we're going to experiment with. This is the channel we're going to go out to. And so I think that by being able to leave something that everyone, it's like leaving them a foundation that they can count on. They've been counting on direct mail for years and years and years. I can continue to count on direct mail. I'm going to have a paycheck. The funding is still going to come in. But it allowed at the same time for us to kind of carve out space for innovation over here in another channel. It allowed us to experiment with a new audience because marketing is all experimenting. You guys know this, right? It's try this. If it works, great. If it doesn't, move on quick.
Yeah.
But so let me give you just a really quick example. Because we left direct mail and email alone, because they were reliable, they were working, we decided to invest in our social channels. We decided that's where we were going to experiment. You don't have as much money that's invested there, right? We weren't investing the kind of money there that we were in direct mail. So my 40% of my budget went back to direct mail. Where I moved the 60% was branding, changing our brand, coming up with all new materials, right? So we needed everything new website, new everything. So that 60% started there. And then we launched on social, specifically Instagram. And we really honed in on that as one channel that we were going to focus on. And we decided we really needed to understand how did that algorithm work. We studied it. We looked at how the algorithm was going to work. We knew that we would get better visibility in the algorithm if we used all those in-platform tools. So we stopped creating external content and posting it, and we started creating internal content on the platform. We changed our messaging from fundraising or from volunteering to engaging, very emotional, more human. We use Johnny a lot. And we did this consistently for 2 full years, all through 2020 and 2021. We didn't throw a ton of money there other than a staff person. And at the time we only had a staff person, and we had money creating all of the visual elements of the new branding. But we were not fundraising on social at all. Of course, we still used Facebook. We still used Twitter. We used all the channels, but we really focused on Instagram. We were not asking for money. We weren't asking for people to volunteer. All we were doing was connecting. We had no asks. And when we did that, the growth was exponential. Now, my caveat is it was also 2020. So while we were sharing hope through hardship, everyone desired hope through hardship, right? So I sometimes I joke and say all the planets came in alignment, but that's God, right? That is God putting everything together. And so we saw success. We learned from it. We got better at it. And so we spent 2 years just cultivating an audience. Then in 2022, we started spending. So we cultivated first before we put a single dollar towards social. And when we put money towards social, we didn't do it in advertising. We hired a staff person, and we added a cultivation strategy to our comments and our direct messages. So we brought a staff person on, and we treated every comment and every direct message that came to us like it was a phone call coming into the ministry, and we answered them all. So this dedicated staff role responded personally. They responded thoughtfully. They prayed with people. They connected them to the right people in the organization. And that simple shift resulted in us having some of the highest engagement rates in the entire industry. And we do benchmark ourselves against other major nonprofits. And our engagement rates are sometimes 10 to 1 over a major nonprofit. It's because we took the time to create the relationship and to cultivate the community. Once we did that for a year, then we started spending money. Now we started doing advertising. Now we started doing a lot more of that. And, now as direct mail continues to decline, as email is flat in the market, digital and social fundraising are growing every single year for us. So it was a very intentional strategy that we took that allowed us to manage and bring in the funds that were needed for the ministry by not disrupting every channel, but by picking the new channels we were going to really focus on and test through. So that's kind of how we did it.
I have what may sound like a crass question for you in response to everything you just said, but you'll probably understand why, which is, how did you stay employed? Because most people in this role are given about 18 to 24 months to implement their strategy. And if it doesn't work, they're let go to move on to their next thing. But when you said it took probably about 4 to 5 years to actually see like the results, like, were you hitting milestones along the way, or like what made you keep going? Because I might be like, okay, I need to, exit this strategy and move on.
I think so from a fundraising perspective, you can look at our numbers, and from the day we launched our new brand strategy externally to the world, it was 2019. When we flipped the brand to the new logo, to the new visual image, from that point on, Carly, you see our numbers did this. So the entire time that we were doing this, just that newness in branding, just that it gave people, ooh, this is something to watch, right? This looks different. I have a joke with my team. I tell them we have a strategy here to disrupt someone's day. But it was disrupting what they expected from Joni and Friends. So the look was new. The way we were talking was new. And it just brought in incredible. We had a 12% increase in fundraising revenue the first year we flipped our brand.
Wow.
So that was 2019. Obviously 2020 hit. We all know 2021 was an off the charts year, but if you look at our revenue, it's done this up until now. And we're about to hit a plateau, which is a 7-year business principle, right? You have to hit that. But what we saw was continued engagement. We were very lucky, right? I totally believe that luck has a lot to do with it, that the Lord comes behind you and takes the small work of your hands and makes it huge. But our awareness and everything, we were measuring it in very unique ways, because we were not going out and doing big awareness studies to watch it move 0.1% and be excited about it. But we were looking at awareness from followers. We were looking at engagement rates. We were looking at revenue, of course. We're always looking at revenue. We were looking at number of new donors coming to the ministry and how were they coming to the ministry. And so as those things continued to increase, hopefully, and I don't think it was behind my back, but I think that the rest of the organization was seeing the value of what the team was doing. And I love that when they give you time to prove that the strategy can work, right? And I think too often we jump from strategies too quickly, but there were little things all along the way. We had just the honor of having 3 viral videos that hit way over 10 million views. And so of course, then you do that and your followers increase and your engagement goes up and everything else, goes from it. But the entire organization felt the momentum of what was happening. And I really feel that momentum is what everyone started to get behind, right? When you see momentum happening, it's really easy to get excited about it. And so, there were ups and downs along the way. There were things we tried that didn't work. And I haven't shared those with you, but there were definitely things that we tried that didn't work. but there was this general lift across every channel. And I think that's probably why I'm still employed. To answer your question.
Yeah.
What, Donna, as we're wrapping up here, I imagine somebody listening to this just feeling like, man, I'm resonating with this. I want to move in this direction. This is something that our organization needs. And they're like fired up, but they're like, but what should I do first? Like, what's the next step? What would you tell them? And where should they go?
I think your next step is you really have to look at your organization. And I really would look at what is the risk of not doing it. I know we mentioned that before, but what is the risk if you don't? What are the assets that you have as a brand? What have you cultivated and created so far? And what is the risk to your organization if you don't?
Yeah.
And if you can put a story around that, leadership doesn't want to take those kind of risks. No senior leader wants to be the one that said, no, we're not going to do that because I don't care about the future of the organization, right? No senior leader is not going to want to deal with a risk that's coming their direction. But if there's any way you can convince people to think further than a year, and that's one of the things I have found very difficult in the nonprofit world. The for-profit world doesn't function in years; they function in 3 to 5 years segments. We know that by the time I look at January, the year is done, right? I'm too late. I can't make any difference. I've got to be thinking several years in advance. Marketing takes time. Marketing done well takes time. And if you can continue to fund your organization and get them to give you little bits to test and prove to them, maybe that's even the way if you're getting a lot of pushback. Like I said, this all didn't happen in one meeting for me, right? So how along the way can you do small tests to prove to them that you can gain some new audience members, that you can do this in small scale before they take it big scale? And I think a lot of organizations would look at that and really grab onto it, maybe really jump in and say, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, that's super helpful. As we're closing, we do still have our mystery question, but for people who want to connect with you or follow along or learn more about ministry as well, can you give them some next steps?
Well, LinkedIn is always a good way to connect with me, but I am open to people sending an email. Donna Lucas at johnnyandfriends.org. I do a lot of phone calls with other organizations. But I would encourage people to just reach out, and you can either connect with me, you connect with someone else on my team. I know they're out there at a lot of conferences and stuff, but we're happy to share what's worked here. I'm always open to having conversations because every time I learn something from somewhere else too. So it won't be one-sided. I'll be picking their brain too.
Yeah. Well, we're so grateful for your time today. And again, I genuinely feel there's so much here for people to take away and really put into action. I'm aligned with you, believing that brand and marketing are a really important part for an organization. And so we're really grateful that you've taken the time today. And would love to ask you our mystery question. It's in line with the conversation that we've been having. So we're all going to answer it, myself, Carly, everybody. But the question is this: what is a current brand that really grabs your attention, that you're like paying attention to right now?
Which one should I bring? All right, I'm gonna share this one, and Carly might expect this one, but a brand that really attracts my attention right now is the NFL, and I'm very interested in how they are working through a challenge for them, which is all the NIL money that college athletes are getting, and these these prima donnas that are being prepped to come into the NFL. And I've been very interested to watch exactly how they are managing their teams, managing their communication about their teams, but the consistency that they have across the fields. I love watching consistency and how brands do it. And every team has their own culture around it, yet they still, you could tell NFL the minute you see it, right? Yeah. So the Bills Mafia and the Chiefs Kingdom, they all are the same, right? Yeah. You know, the crazy Eagles fans, it's just crazy. And I love that there's so much culture in every single team, and yet they all still have this brand consistency around them. So timely because we're heading into Super Bowl, but, and I'm a huge football fan, but I love watching them from a brand perspective and how they put it all together.
Yeah. Are you a Rams fan?
No. I am a Patriots fan. Go Pats. Whoever thought they would be in the final. Whoever thought they would.
Well, Scott's a Bears fan. So I was hoping you were a Rams fan because it would have made for a more interesting conversation. But you're right by the Rams facility. Like you could probably get there real fast.
I am literally right down the hill from it.
Yeah.
That's a good one. One of the, honestly, I think you brought the NFL. One of the most, and I don't know if it started this way, but I believe that it did. But one of the most brilliant marketing not even campaigns, like efforts maybe, I feel like is fantasy football. Talk about, I have to believe it started with the question of how can we get people to pay attention to more games? And I'm relatively new compared to others. And I'm like, now I want to watch 6 to 7 games to see this person, to see this person. And I don't know if that's where it started, but it feels like it. And it certainly
has changed the way people watch football too, right?
Yes.
People don't watch a single game. They flip from game to game to game, right? Yep. So it's changed. And I do think you're right, Scott, that if you look at it in hindsight, they likely were trying to get people personally involved, right? You know, thinking about building community, right? Now you have a whole community of people that you are watching with every single week and competing with. So I think that fantasy football is very interesting in how it has changed the way we as Americans watch this beloved game of ours, right?
Yes.
But yeah, it's a cool thing.
Yeah.
I also love My Cleats, My Cause. I think that's been a very, of course, the footwear person in me loves that about it. But that's been a really fun thing to watch and to see them almost force their players to have some kind of charitable part of their life. And of course, the amount of money they get paid, they should be having a lot of charitable foundations in their life. But
yeah.
Carly, what about you?
I don't think we've ever talked about this, so I'm not going to use this brand, but I just have to say it. But my favorite brand of all time is Nike, for so many reasons, which I know is the opposite. I know.
That's like a very controversial thing that you, Carly. I would have kept that one.
My heart, girl.
I would have kept that one just to yourself. But okay,
yeah.
All right. Here we
go.
I'm
not going to talk about that.
Carly knows my Nike Adidas story too.
I'm going to talk about CrossFit, because similar to what you said about the NFL, CrossFit is kind of coming off of this huge surge, but then some issues with their CEO and then some player safety issues. But also, there's such a big difference between CrossFit, the elite athletes, and CrossFit, the local gym community that people feel. And watching them trying to figure out how do we like separate the sport from like the people like me who go every day and like have a different experience with the brand. Just seeing them try to manage that has been really interesting. And I love CrossFit. Like I follow it, all of that. So kind of being part of it and then also seeing them manage that has been really interesting too.
Awesome. That's awesome.
I have a handful. I think the one that I'm going to land on though is Costco.
Oh, Scott.
And
tell me more.
Not just because I enjoy
Not just
shopping
because you
there.
love going there for the samples.
I certainly do. Trust me. But I think that the consistency and quality in which they regularly show up, and that they've created, at least in my experience, in like the brand or the products that they'll allow into a warehouse to sell, and the return policy, which is literally at any point, if you're not happy, like, well, you can return it.
Yeah.
Which, do some people abuse? Absolutely. There's wild stories that I've heard. But for me, as someone who's not going to abuse that, there's this confidence that it's instilled. And really, like, I now associate high quality with Costco and even with the Kirkland brand because of the cult stories of, actually, this thing is like this, this real brand, but they just kind of use it in packages, Kirkland, all this stuff. And it's really fascinating to me because no matter what, like when we go on vacation somewhere, me and my family, we tend to like to find a place, whether it's an Airbnb where we can make our own meals, we shop, and we're always like, well, we got to find a Costco. And, there's this sort of built-in trust and consistency across the board that I've experienced that has that brand very high in my brand loyalty and a brand that I'm really interested in.
Interesting.
They have won you
And the
over,
samples.
Scott, because when I think of Kirkland, I think of bottom of the barrel quality. So the fact that you think high quality for Kirkland, they're winning with you on their branding.
Well, and they have a brand advocate in me, because we can talk later when the podcast is over, and I'll explain how you are mistaken and you've been missing out. And hopefully it'll open up a whole new world of lower priced, high quality goods in your life. But we'll see. Well, Donna, thank you again. This podcast has been really, really insightful. I think encouraging for people as well who are wanting to see these things move, but maybe pushing up against that idea of, why should we focus on this? Why is this a priority? All of that. And I think you gave some really concrete next steps. And so we're so grateful for your time today and really appreciate you coming on the show.
This was fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
The Responsive Lab is brought to you by Virtuous. We believe nonprofits deserve technology built to engage donors with the same personal connections and experiences they receive from today's leading brands.
Virtuous is an enterprise fundraising platform that unifies CRM, marketing, giving, and insights with AI to help build deeper donor relationships, automate manual work, and grow giving. Learn more at virtuous.org.